Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a continuation of our budget hearings for the Board of Supervisors. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Supervisor Mills, would you lead us, please?
Yes, let's begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we continue, we will have announcements by Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Mills?
Yes, I just wanted to let folks know that in the course of even the last couple months, I have been attending budget hearings for various districts throughout the county, as well as like CCWD, Copper Fire, Murphy Sanitary, City. It just goes on and on. So the budget process is exactly that. It's a process. It is. We're in the beginning stages of it, and from here we will go to negotiating as to how we're going to best make this work. So have no fear. The discussions are how we can get things done, and I'm so pleased with the amount of discussion that's going on from this board. I've sat through budget hearings at this board many years before I actually took the seat. So it's good to see this level of discussion, this level of interest in what's going on in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I believe now we're on Supervisor Mills' board comments and discussion. And I'll let you announce the next segment.
Thank you. Well, actually, I had asked a question of the building department regarding AVA, if you recall yesterday, and I believe that they do have that information available if they'd like to report out.
Good morning, Chair and Board. We'll have the information on the AVA, and I have Todd here that briefly has some numbers for you, so go right ahead.
Good morning. I'll give you a really quick overview too. AVA is an abandoned vehicle abatement, and that program is funded through your vehicle license fees. It's $1 it's assessed on your registration, just for general information. This year, we have abated a total of 146 vehicles, and we still have approximately 20 that are in the queue to be towed. So that's where we're at right now. It's a good tool for us to use during our code enforcement cases, because the vehicles can be removed from both private and public property. So, have any questions for me?
Excellent. I just needed to know what those numbers were.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
So we're moving on to environmental health. I noticed that in the environmental health, they were talking about in the cannabis funding that they had 3 full-time equivalent positions on the allocation list. My question, and I don't see environmental health here, would be whether or not those are filled, if they've been filled at all. C.O. Lutz, do you know at all?
I know that, and I'm checking right now for the sheet to tell you how many. There is at least 1 filled.
Okay.
My computer's a little slow this morning. But I know that there is at least 1 filled and possibly 2, but not all.
But not all. Okay. So in the main body section, this would be line item 4130, permits and grading. The year end 6/30/16, I want to just confirm that's for actually the 2015 budget year? Just so I'm right with that. So during the 2015 budget year, we collected $1,989 in permits for grading?
Yes, you're talking about with that column, that
Yes.
year-end actuals. That is correct.
And
so
in-
those are actuals that we would have collected.
Correct. So in the next budget year, which is the one we're in now, we only collected 450 in grading permits?
Yeah, and I would, unfortunately, without having environmental health here to answer the question as to why that revenue is down, I know that when we sat down and talked to them about where their activities are, they felt the revenue requests they were asking were based on actual activities that they've been doing this year, and therefore a reflection of what they expected to be doing next year.
So when I look at 4216 penalties other, at nothing collected this year? Penalties?
And on the penalties, that might also be a conservative budget approach where, because you don't necessarily know if you're doing a, you know, if you're assessing a penalty, it's hard to project that. If we haven't been assessing very many, I asked for a conservative estimate of the revenues.
Yes, that would be for this budget year. I'm more concerned with just how many penalties we've collected in 2015 and 2016 budget years
Yeah,
based upon the extreme amount of grading that has occurred in our county and just the lack of ability to get permit price costing in here at all and penalty costing. It just,
I might suggest that if we want to move to a different department and give environmental health time to come here and actually respond.
CAO lots, I think that's appropriate.
And Judy's going to answer the question I was just going to give you, which is we currently have 2 vacant positions for environmental health on the cannabis funds and 1 filled.
And then we also have a air pollution control specialist that is currently open,
That's tied to cannabis,
besides the 2 cannabis. It's under a different line item.
but that's not tied to cannabis.
No,
but in that department, we currently have 3 open positions.
yes.
Okay. No, the only purpose for me to bring that particular issue up was that maybe that needs to be a secondary issue somewhere during the budget process. It might even lead to some type of revision of our codes or our policies regarding grading. It might lead to possible additional fines or penalties for grading without permit that we might even go so far as to say, no, you're not going to bring in an as-built, you're going to have to do something else. But I think that needs to be a board discussion considering the level of grading that we've had in our county. And I'm just looking to the rest of the supervisors that they might want to consider a more complete discussion on that at a future point, not so much for this budget.
So would you like a representative from environmental health? now,
Actually, it's
or
not,
you wanna-
I don't believe it's
Okay.
necessary. You know, they have enough to do, so. I noticed in line item 4686, the water well program, that's a 60% decrease there in revenue. That's a substantial reduction, so I'm not certain why we would be that conservative considering when I'm seeing year over year, and I'm not seeing the trending here, so I don't know for sure what that trending would be for 12 years, 12, 13, or 14, or 15. I only see 15 at $75,595. So bouncing it down to 45,000 seems to be quite a push on a conservative side for revenue for that particular line item.
Unless, again, the overall trend has been the reduction in requests for wells to be drilled, and the activities therefore have not been going in that direction. Obviously, part of that's going to be reflected in new housing builds, whether someone, or agriculture wells or what have you. Again, I have a note out, environmental health will come and we can have somebody respond to some of those questions on maybe trends for their service delivery.
Thank you. I noticed then going on, this is to the on-site wastewater, we eliminated a department, 1 position was eliminated. It was a vacant registered environmental health specialist. That would be on the first page, so that's a good number. And we don't have them in the budget at all. When we look at then in the next page on charges for services, again, we have a 24% reduction below actual from the 2015. I'm not certain about the 2016, how accurate that would be, but a 24% reduction is, again, pretty substantial in a revenue stream. And we should be able to justify why that severe reduction is taking place. On the tab for animal services, is the City of Angels contributing to animal services at this time? Do we know?
They are not.
They are not. But they are they under contract?
No, that's actually an area that we've identified as where we are providing a service there without necessarily a reimbursement.
Okay, but we don't know what level of service we're providing either?
That came
Right
up
now.
during budget discussions, and that was a question that I had, is can we break out what that true cost looks like for us? What our service calls have been in the city? Because I think that is a valuable piece of information.
So between now and final budget, we should be able to have a better feel for what
I
that
am
is?
definitely hoping that we have that, yes.
Okay, do we have any vacant positions in that particular department?
I don't recall offhand. I'd have to go back and research that.
Okay, so, and I'm kind of maybe putting you on the spot a little bit here, but in the Humane Society work that's being done, got an answer. Thank you.
We do have a vacant position. We recently had a resignation in the animal shelter for the office tech.
Okay, and it hasn't been vacant that long, though?
No, and then we also have a vacancy as an animal shelter assistant, which just came up a few weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hawkins, how many animal control officers do we have?
We have 3.
We have 3?
We added 1 last year. We had 2, and then we added 1 last year, I believe, at mid-year. Or I can't remember if it's that final budget or mid-year, but we've recently added 1.
So those positions are filled then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In our contract or our work with the Humane Society, are we progressing along that might have an impact on our budget for next year?
In terms of, are you talking about the Humane Society funding a building
Yes.
to be coming in? I guess your question being, do we have a cost in that? My understanding is at this point, no, they were raising the funds and building that building. If anything, we would then, when we go into the new building with better efficiencies, actually see a decrease in expenses of maintenance and overhead within the animal shelter.
So we should be looking more towards next year's budget for what that might be than this year's budget?
Yeah, considering the last update I had, they were, Humane Society was just engaging an architectural firm to be doing that build out. I think we're far enough out that it would be next to impossible to do an accurate prediction of what we'd expect.
Okay. What is their current status on vehicles? They do have vehicles, and I see no requests in here for additional vehicles.
Actually, and this might have been
Or did I miss it in another part?
under capital equipment on 5701, we did actually put in, based on, yes, 1 vehicle, based on that same concern that we had elsewhere. They have an aging fleet of vehicles that they've been keeping going, patching together. Knowing that, I recommended that they go ahead and add a vehicle replacement in there and plan on trying to do an annual replacement. We're talking about a lot fewer vehicles than the sheriff's department, for instance. With 3 animal control officers, that's really 3 vehicles, making sure that they're at least rotating those through to have a replacement plan in place. We don't have 3 vehicles that have to be replaced at the same time.
Okay. In line item 4100 regarding licenses, it is in the code that, and this is something previous boards have decided as to what that was going to be, that cost for licensing, and yet we're not getting any reasonable cost recovery there. It's almost become a blue law simply because we don't have any kind of compliance. So the question would be, how are we going to achieve any cost recovery on licensing? Or does the board want to come back and discuss some options here? Because this is a backfilling of general fund money.
Putting on former hat as former director of animal services in Tulare County, I can say that it is a chronic problem in most all municipalities to try and get compliance. It's unfortunate, but it is a pretty common trend, and I think one of the questions that I asked for in reviewing the general fees is, what is a reasonable fee? And I know that that's something beyond this budget, but when we get into July and August, I expect some departments, including animal services, to be bringing back updated or recommended fees for the board to consider. That being said, I don't think the cost of a fee to get full cost recovery in this program, I think you start to run into that line of it's hard to get compliance, you raise the fee even higher, and then more people say I can't afford to do it, and then you get fewer people that actually are complying. So there is kind of a fine line that you have to reach between those 2 points.
Actually, I would look in the other direction of saying maybe we need to possibly lower the licensing fees, which would allow people to become more compliant.
For that same point,
We just need
yes.
to have some type of discussion on it. It's a big hit. 52,000 a year is a big hit to our budget. And then we're doing a full transfer in. I would rather try to find some way that we can encourage our citizens to license their animal as required and in essence save our general fund, even if it's a little bit. Oh,
Well, looks like
Here he
at
is.
least someone from Animal Services here, if you want to ask Animal Services questions.
yes. Yeah, Henning, we were talking about the license fees for animals and the difficulty in gaining compliance with that. And that possibly the board should maybe look in the future to a reduction or some type of a change in the structure of that fee to gain better compliance.
That is true. What we could look into is having a dedicated officer that is doing license compliance and vaccination compliance, which is the most important part.
Yes, it is.
In our county, we do have probably 45% compliance. With a number of people, we probably will never get compliance. They live here for a reason, and that is to be out of the county's reach. Other people, probably it's more a factor of the easiness to get the license. Sorry, I just ran down the hill
No, it's
because I
okay.
heard
Catch
you.
your breath. Catch your breath.
Didn't take the
What-
helicopter, huh?
What we are looking into is having another software package added to what we have to allow for online licensing, which would make the process easier and would take the burden off to either fill out a check and send it in or drive down here to San Andreas to pay for a $7 license. What I also would like to do is go back. I think Title VI would allow that to offer amnesty so that we can pull in people that think that if I go down now, I really get dinged, which we try to not to do too hard because our goal is to get the dogs licensed and have them in the system so that we can have insurance that the dogs are getting vaccinated.
So the primary goal here, though, should be a public health aspect and being sure that rabies shots are being taken care of and that ultimately, some of your budget should come from public health because of the service that you provide from that side, which
Well,
is
it
about...
still would come out of the same pot.
I
Finally
understand.
coming out of the general fund, yes. But the main purpose is, you're right, is public safety and have the dogs vaccinated so that we don't have transmitted rabies cases. And I remember you that we had a rabid dog in Copperopolis area last year. I think Amador County has now 3 rabid dogs within the last 2 years. So it is prevalent in this area and it is important.
So it isn't that we want to be mean in terms of getting licensing of animals. It's more of being sure that we maintain a safe environment here in the county.
That is correct, and that's why we started to even offer free rabies clinics where I pay the rabies vaccine out of donation money, and we have veterinarians that donate their times. And that has proven quite successful. We are now partnering up as well with Rescue 209. It's a private citizen group in Valley Springs, and they take the lead, and we're just stepping back, which I think helps as well people to go to those free rabies clinics without fearing that we will, at the end of the day, come and get them.
So roughly how many volunteers do you have assisting you?
We have over 100 volunteers on the list, and of those, probably about 60 to 70 come on a regular basis. Some come weekly, some come daily, and we have a few that even come twice a day.
And not only do they volunteer their time, but they also, people give things to the animal shelter for...
That is
food
very
and-
true, and the best example was during the Butte fire. I pretty much went through the Butte fire without expending any dime of my budget because whatever we needed, we got donated from the community, from the local businesses, so that we could do pretty much everything.
Great. Thank you for running over here. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. In moving on to, I believe it's agriculture, we have a 60,000 budgeted there. Judy, does that include the benefit package for that position? When we're talking about budgeting someone for, this is a cannabis registration funds are being used for a agricultural biologist, inspector one.
Yes, I believe the numbers that
So
we
they
put
will
in the
always-
budget were weighted averages.
So we'll
or
always
weighted
include,
salaries.
when we say a number, we'll always include the benefit package with it?
Yes.
Okay, we're not leaping here. Go ahead.
Supervisor Mills, I have a question. Ms. Hawkins, is our agricultural commissioner, is he an employee or a department head? What's his classification?
He is an employee. He's appointed by the board for a 4-year period.
But he's an actual employee.
But he is an appointed department head, basically, but does work under the Environmental Health Agency
Okay.
Administrator.
I was a little confused on that structure.
It is a different structure.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, it's quite all right. Moving on to Equipment Service Center, and Jeff, this is just, I know we're kind of beating a horse here regarding the fleet, and it isn't just your fleet, it's fleet all the way through this county. And I know that the CEO has discussed this previously, but we probably need to find a way to get a complete breakdown of all of our vehicles in the fleet of I'm thinking autos as well as light trucks. Not so much heavy equipment for you because those are specialized pieces of equipment. But if we had some kind of way, you are maintaining all of the fleet for the county in-house?
No. We only maintain Public Works, Transit, Integrated Waste Management, and Roads and Bridges.
And the rest of the fleet is being serviced how?
Yes, the Sheriff's Office has one bay in the Equipment Service Center where he does maintenance to some of the patrol vehicles and the smaller vehicles, but not equipment.
And so he's keeping his own maintenance records over there?
That's correct.
Okay.
And-
And for instance, Health and Human Services, I know, Kristen, you've got quite a number of vehicles in your fleet as well, do you not? What is it, about 65 or 70 or more?
Vehicles?
Yeah.
Not quite that many that I'm aware of. Kristen Brink's Health and Human Services, so similar to what Jeff had just indicated about the Sheriff's Office, we manage our own individual fleets and have the records in-house as well.
Okay, so do you have a service bay, or are you sending it to
We
contractors outside of the system here?
Yes, that, just to confirm with Marcos, yes, we have individual contracts with local providers who will service our vehicles and have all of those records, as I just indicated.
I can add some food for thought on this one. This is an interesting, one of those interesting things that you stumble upon where we do technically have the fleet services within Public Works. However, my understanding in looking at historical costs and why most departments have done as HHSA has indicated is that it was cost prohibitive to actually send it to our own internal service. It was cheaper to send it to a dealership or to another type of a local repair shop. I think from a policy standpoint, that's something that we need to evaluate in terms of if you only have one or two programs using the equipment services or fleet services, then the cost per repair is going to be very high, obviously, whereas if you have more using it, hopefully then those costs spread across a greater number of departments. But that is something that we have to look at, and certainly we'd have to add staff if we went the opposite direction. but getting an accurate reflection of what it's costing to maintain our vehicles, I think would be an important component to looking at our overall fleet. And that's something that we're working on trying to pull together with departments.
And it might be true that in certain departments, it's not beneficial, so a cost-benefit analysis, even if it was just a rough one, would give you an idea, department by department, whether or not it'd be functionally correct, or we need to maybe move in a different direction through an RFP or some other type of method, so.
I have a question,
Yes.
Supervisor Mills. In that cost analysis, how do we get our vehicles to our independent contractors for service? Do we have someone that delivers those and picks them up? That's a member of your staff?
Other duties as assigned, yes, members of our team will do that.
So that's kind of a hidden cost, is the lost time of delivering that vehicle and picking it up. It's true. That might be consideration on that study. Also, maybe a mobile fleet maintenance.
Health
where
and
we
Human
can
Service.
contract with
yeah.
somebody coming in and service vehicles on premise here.
Yeah, Health and
that-
Human
is that
Services
gonna
would be
be-
happy to gather our data that we have to contribute to this, and we're really open either direction, whatever works best for the county.
That's good, and make sure we discuss everything. Thank you, Chris.
Jeff, you had a thought?
It's not a thought, but we'd be more than willing to contribute what we have. We do have all of our vehicles and heavy equipment tracked, what it costs us to maintain those. And we do bring in outside vendors to do work here when it's outside the expertise of our mechanics.
Correct.
And our mechanic staff. So we do that already. The question becomes I look at my snowplow fleet, which consists of 1973, 74, 75 military surplus vehicles. We essentially are repairing those after every snowstorm. But you have to have the money to be able to invest, to be able to replace those. And we are definitely way behind. Public Works, I know, is way behind. If we start going to a full cost recovery and we start accommodating the cost of capitalized replacement, our hourly rate is going to be untenable.
Exactly.
Mr. Crovis, one quick question, only because of my constituents. Do we have a machine or a piece of equipment that used to be utilized to clean out our roadside
Ditches.
drainage areas?
We have several different pieces of equipment that will do that. Some are backhoes with a V-bucket for a typical roadside ditch. We also have a Vactor truck, which is a large truck that has a tank and a vacuum with a hose that we can use to suck debris out of culverts when they're blocked. However, that's pretty much designed for loose debris. You're not going to
Correct.
pull rocks out of a culvert with the Vactor truck. So that's the type of thing that we use. When we get our culverts that are plugged with heavy debris, sediment, silt, rock, you're using hand methods and invented tools.
At one time, years ago, there was a piece of equipment that would actually drive along. I understand it was an attachment to a dump bed situation where it actually come out and clean out not necessarily the culverts, but the drainage areas leading to the culverts in the county road. Do we still have that equipment?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
I have some questions. Yeah, Jess, on the question of snow removal,
Okay.
we do contract some of that out, do we not?
No, well, we utilize extra hire employees. So we have a list of people that have gone through a background check, driver's check, license check, and a training program for snow removal. And when we anticipate storms that are coming in that will extend beyond available people that we have to perform that snow removal, we begin calling to bring them in. They come and essentially pick up the vehicles, they do the snow plowing, track their hours, and are paid as extra hire employees. So, and that's a system that I think has been in place, for a long time. And I think the determination was that was less expensive than contracting out.
Yeah, at
snowplow
one time we
services.
did do some contracting out.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And is there any cost recovery at all?
There is cost recovery for snow plowing.
Okay. And that is
State cost recovery.
state cost recovery. At what percentage or what?
You know, I don't know. I don't know enough about it yet.
Okay.
Supervisor Tofinelli, I did a little research on that, and I don't know if it's changed over the last 12 months, but I understand that we have to perform 25% of our snow removal program before those state funds kick in. I don't know how they judge that, but there is cost recovery through the state, but we have to meet a minimum level of service for that. And that, of course, depends on the weather and the use of the snow equipment. You may want to take a look at that, Mr. Crovis, and
Yeah,
see if
please
that's still
do.
good.
Sure will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Continuing along that same line, having had a large fleet myself, G Capital Fleet, CO Lutz, G Capital Fleet was the preferred vendor for me on that. And what we really had there was not to provide any heavy service, but to just do the simple oil changes and the normal, 6,000 or 10,000 mile maintenances on vehicles. And it could be done on a mobile basis because there are a lot of preferred vendors that they would work with. So it eliminated the driving to a specific location every time. You could just kind of pick the location closest to you. So there's a lot of options available on that. And I think just for the basic maintenance services, either a mobile vehicle like what Jeff was talking about or something like that, where we're taking an employee per hour and we're letting them drive, that's a deadhead, driving to and from, and we're getting nothing accomplished, that expense needs to be calculated into that overall cost. So the other thing is with fleets, you want to be sure that the vehicles that you're using are appropriate for the service duty that you're trying to create. So we certainly don't want to, and I even found this with tires, there are wrong tires and right tires for driving in the mountains. It's quite simple. You cannot, but when I drove in the valley, if I used mountain tires, I wore them out. So there's a lot of variables that go into this, and if we start to look at our fleet costs, we might be able to see some savings, just how we're approaching that whole process in that. I'm on to rim fees. We had budgeted last year in line item 5301, $3,162,937, and we're now budgeting $2,663,000.
Excuse me, Mr.
It's on rim fees. And if you line
County
item-
rim
right.
fees.
County rim fees, I'm sorry. I guess the more the question, Jeff, would be, what is the trending on these rim fees? Are they pretty stable year over year, or are you seeing any trending?
The trending follows right along with the
Building permits and,
with building permits on those areas that are subject to the rim. And recall that the rim fee program was put together with Nexus to essentially allow new development to pay its fair share of its future impacts as these communities, these subdivision communities, are built out. And there is an application of rim fees in a percentage within the Nexus. And, by design, we use rim fees as the fee of last resort. So, for example, we've committed, I think, about $1.4 million or $1.2 million in rim fee to the Wagon Trail project for construction, because it was one of the highest priority projects in the rim fee program, and B, it had a component. My recollection is a 19% component of what the build out in copper would be for future demand on that length of roadway. So that commitment of local fees is partially how we leveraged additional grant funding, for example, the FLAP program or the special program where Caltrans has married a shop and a STIP program to allow us to give us more money on Wagon Trail. We may or may not end up using that 1.5 million, but the ability to commit it, to have it in a bank, and to have it justifiable gave us the ability to be competitive on a capital project.
I think one of the questions that came up years ago in my discussions was that the rim fee being collected from one area is being used in another area. Wagon Trail would be a good example of that, where they're collecting rim fees from Valley Springs and West Point and everywhere else, but it ends up on the Wagon Trail.
Indeed, the RIM program is a county-wide program with impacts to county-wide roads. And then the Board of Supervisors are the ones that set the priority projects county-wide. Thinking that, perhaps you're collecting a RIM fee from a single home built up in Supervisor Garamendi's district, potentially helping to pay for a road improvement down in Copper, might seem initially unfair or not. That's not how the RIM program was conceptualized and implemented. It was implemented as it's a county-wide collection, and there are roads that were underfunded and needed improvement. This was a method to do it, and then the priority projects are set by the board. So,
should we at some point in the future have another discussion on those fees?
we are required to come back to you with an analysis at a minimum every other year. We are behind, and with more of a major analysis every 5 years. One of the things that's slowing us down is we are subject, and we think that development is going to be subject to land use designations as part of the revised general plan. And so we're kind of waiting while we get the general plan in place, and then we are ready to come to you and say, based on these land use assumptions, based on this list of projects that have been proven by Nexus, what is the highest priority? Prior to that, it seems premature for a major look at the RIM program, because we could very well be prioritizing projects based upon old general plan and, analysis that was done 10 years ago.
Excellent.
Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did.
Mr. Clovis, one issue. Is there an additional RIM fees for certain designated areas? I understand Forest Meadows in my district. How do they address a RIM fee, the county RIM fee? And I understand that in the Valley Springs Basin District, is there additional RIM fees on projects?
Okay. We've got to be careful about our terminology. A RIM fee is a road impact mitigation fee.
Right.
New development pays a fair share into that program. We have benefit basins that are much more specific. So if you look at the Valley Springs Benefit Basin, that's an assessment on new development that is specific to generally impacts the state highways and improvements that we want to make to the state highways for the benefit of the locals. Fair to say? Supervisor Tofinelli's quite familiar with this. We also have additional fees that are collected within community service areas. And that is because at the time the development was approved, the county didn't have the funds and didn't see the future to have funds to be able to maintain those roads. The roads are privately owned, privately developed, privately maintained public roads. So
most of them are dedicated to the county to be open. And
to be
not
open to the
gated.
public.
Yeah, that's correct, and not gated.
Not gated. So that's yet a different method that the county uses to have additional funds. So that type of an instance is more similar to what's going on in Forest Meadows, where there is an assessment on development within the subdivision to help defray the cost of those roads.
Are those numbers reflected in your budget?
No, we do not. Well, I don't know what you have in your notebook. I've got the various benefit basins, and we track those funds. I've got Copper, I've got Valley Springs, I've got Bret Harte, we've got countywide RIM. In addition to that, I have all of our CSAs, and we track those how we should say it, expenditure accounts, savings versus expenditure. So for CSA 2, 4, 8, 12, and 1, we have about 5 of those. And then there's one very, very small PRD, which is a small road that generates not very much money. There's about $14,000 in that account for 2 or 3 miles of road for maintenance. It's similar to a community service area, but it's just called a
Thank you for
PRD.
that information.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right.
Great answers. And I'm moving on to environmental health at this point. Just as a broader question here, Kristen, is
Do you mean Health and Human Services?
Health and Human Services. I'm
Because
sorry.
I was going to say, I know
you're
environmental
bad.
health staff is actually out there now, if you'd
I
like
saw
to
that.
revisit that tab, or if you want to go to Health and Human
No,
Services.
we'll move on to Health and Human Services, so I
Okay.
stay with these tabs. Kristen, on the state realignment money and everything, a lot of that's up in the air, and it really does impact you. It impacts your department in a big way. So the 1991 realignment and then the subsequent, was it 2011 realignment? All of that should we be looking at something this year to be a little bit more proactive about what may happen in future years, knowing where the state's direction is at this point?
So, so Kristen brings Health and Human Services. You are correct. The very core, the nature of the realignment funding sources, they're volatile funding sources in general. They are composed of vehicle license fees and sales tax, which we both know, which everyone knows are subject to the economy. So you're correct. They're always a source that has vulnerabilities, and I think that's one of the reasons why many Health and Human Services agencies are conservative with budgets. Because you do have to make sure that you have sufficient savings to be able to carry forward should some sort of an economic downturn, and that you still have sufficient funding for those mandated services. It's also another point to note about those sources in general is that a lot of them float. So a lot of the programs in social health and human services are reimbursement based. So you have to incur the cost first in order to receive the funding. So those funding sources, the realignment funding sources, serve multiple purposes. I believe what you're more specifically speaking of is the whole IHSS component of 91 realignment, which I've spoken before your board before on, and you're correct. As CAO Lutz indicated in his overall presentation on the budget, that's one of the items that has the potential to have much larger impacts in the out years. When we conduct, this is a very much a moving target, this IHSS component as well. So when we very first began and we saw the governor's preliminary budget, it was much more detrimental to our county in the first year. It was around $500,000, as I had mentioned, and wrote in our memos to your board. Since then, as CAO Lutz had mentioned, there has been some negotiations, and that impact has dropped tremendously. It's still bigger. It's still approximately, I think, $138,000 in the first year, and then trends upwards in the out years. So for the immediate, my team has got really close eyes on that funding source. We are watching it. We know that will be okay the first couple of years. Some other counties are not in such a scenario, but given that we are extremely conservative in our budgeting and we watch our finances very, very tight, we think we'll be okay. But as I indicated in the memo to CAO Lutz, this is something in the out years, it has the potential to bring to your board potential service level impacts, since 91 realignment is a major funding source of many of our social services program, child welfare services in particular. So.
And this, if we start a discussion now about what that's going to look like, then we can, as we move into those out years, we can have we're better prepared to respond to whatever it is. I mean, even at CSAC, the discussion was from some counties that this is a state-required mandate and we're basically doing it on behalf of the state. We're not, it's only by a contractual agreement that we do that. So some counties are even saying, why don't we just give it back to the state to handle? It's yours, it's your responsibility, we're just doing it for you. And, but I don't know if that's the answer either. So it's just an opportunity here at the front end of it to have that discussion so that we don't go, oh my, lions and tigers and bears, it's happening. And we really have had some thought before it happens and it gets serious as to what we're going to do with it.
Agreed. And oh, sorry. Did you want to speak?
No, finish.
Agreed. I would like the board to know that we actually are already doing that internally in Health and Human Services. We have an agency-wide strategic plan that's kind of outlining the things that we want to improve on over the next handful of years, looking at prioritizations and needs in our community because, of course, we want to make sure that we aren't rolling out new programs that, or enhancing programs or pulling back in programs that aren't reflective of our community's needs. So that is something that we are currently doing. We have been attending all sorts of seminars and training opportunities to learn how to maximize our funding sources. A lot of our funding sources, as you know, I'll oftentimes get up here and say, this is the contract, however much of this is reimbursable. That's typically actually the bulk of our funding sources have reimbursement. So we are consistently looking at ways to increase the amount of money that we can draw down from federal and state sources. But your point is very well taken.
And I would just add to that also, coming from oversight in a different Health and Human Services agency, we do a very good job in this county of really minimizing how much general fund Health and Human Services is using. If you aren't watching those carefully, it can get out of control really quickly with very large dollar amounts. And I think additionally to that point, that's where we do have some designated fund amounts that will help soften the blow to the general fund initially, but this is going to be a long-term issue that that we're going to have to look at and formulate a strategy on, because if we wait, we will have large service interruptions to some of those critical services that Health and Human Services provides in our community. And, you know, it is an interesting conundrum really on that IHSS program, because it's quickly becoming really the largest cost driver within all of the human services area for sure. And I've heard that comment about giving it back, although I also would imagine the state would argue then they want to look at 91 realignment. And
I'll take that back.
And that's always been a kind of the thing that they've held over counties, because the state has recognized counties overall have benefited from 91 realignment, which is why 2011 realignment was structured so differently. And so it's usually the argument back and forth from the state, no, and ultimately this gets driven by the large counties, Los Angeles, and then your Bay Area counties, that really end up driving policy across the state. And I think it's important where as many of the smaller counties can band together and really have a voice on what those local impacts are, what it looks like, and what we can afford, because we don't have large reserves that some of the Bay Area counties might have, or Los Angeles, and there will be a significant impact to us as we see the IHSS costs continue to increase.
I think the discussion really has to center for this county around when does this become untenable for us? And what does that mean? What kind of impacts? Because what we're talking about here is people's lives. These are people that might be in care homes but are allowed to have a quality of life simply because of IHSS. So I understand the importance of it, and because if we put them in care homes or they end up there, the expense they're horrendous.
Agreed.
And on top of that, the quality of life isn't the same. So it's not the value of the program, it's just how do we do this and how do we work it through? So the sooner we can get into that conversation and that discussion as a board, and from your side, Kristen, I think that we'll be better prepared as to how we're going to respond and how we're going to work through it. And it's a big piece of the pie right now.
It is, and I appreciate you bringing this up because it's a big piece of the pie. And as I had indicated before, in-home supportive services is one of the mandated programs. So that'll be the last to have service level impacts. That's a mandated program that says this is, so to the client faces, or facing outwards to the consumers who benefit from the in-home supportive services programs, no matter how large it grows, that's not what's going to be the impact. The impact is the other programs that are funded with that 91 realignment funding source, which are other social services program. That, yes, that service levels are yes.
Okay. The next question is, do you feel that you have enough staff to respond to grants within your department?
So my response to that,
Sorry, that was out of the blue.
no, that's a great question to be asked by a board. So I would say to respond to them, yes, I do. I'm very proud to say we have a CMSB, County Medical Services Program grant to do outreach, which is part of your board packet. We've asked to add a limited term position because we have this grant source. We have a Mental Health Services Act innovation funding sources because we write grants outwards. And I believe Supervisor Garamendi brought this up earlier, it's more the administration on the back end which is difficult for grants. When you bring in additional services, even with that administrative costs that are associated with the grant, that seems to be trending down in these last handful of years. There tends to be, with the federal and state funding sources, if you're going to utilize portions of that grant for administration, they seem to be dropping from like 20% to 15 to 10, and now you're seeing a lot of them that are maxed at 10, and the requirements on the other end in terms of the amount of paperwork that has to be reported back and the invoicing processes, they're very complicated. So I would say from my team, that would be the bigger end, is that just for your board to note, is that when we take a look at grants and increases in looking to grants or other outside funding sources for service level increases, those are the things that are always going on in our mind, is can we manage them properly on the back end? Because if you don't, there's risk associated, which we would never want to be part of that conversation. We want to do that on the front end. And again, we typically will look at grants and funding opportunities, always not just jumping into everyone that sounds good or looks cool, but really taking a look at what our community's needs are before we decide to turn our attention towards pursuing a specific grant.
Would the larger or broader conversation then be possibly that from a countywide perspective, that we have some type of grant administration or grant administrator built into the administration department or somewhere that can be a receiving place to be sure that we are not giving money back? I don't want us to be obligating ourselves to grants and then find out that we haven't really met the terms. We're giving it back simply because we are incapable of administering properly.
Well, that might be tough. I would actually probably say you'd be better apt to try and fund an additional accountant type position through the auditor's office to be really ensuring compliance against the grant reimbursements. To the administration piece, I think, would need to stay with the department because they really understand the dynamics of what the service delivery is. But if we're talking about somebody who can take the time to really understand what the requirements are of that grant, it would probably be a better position to be funded through the auditor's office. And I'm offering up work to Rebecca, but I'm also trying to offer up that we would, if we looked at it that way, it would probably need to be a position.
And this is work that my office is currently doing, even though we don't have a classification for it. And it's something that, I just take on myself, or I have my assistant do that work, in addition to everything else that we're doing that just keeps falling on us. But yeah, it is a struggle because there's so many hours in a day. And I think that's what's happening is, as we've seen the economy downturn, what departments did was look at, and you heard the sheriff's department talk about it yesterday, which they really have kind of turned to a reliance on grants. And that's not just the sheriff's department, that's every department. And they found these mechanisms in order to bring money in, and that's great, but the administrative oversight on all of those grants is really, really large. And so my staff spends an enormous amount of time, myself included, going and getting copies of these grants from, whether it's the board packet or trying to get them from the departments, and then evaluating how the expenditures occurred against those grants and what the time frame is, when they're going to sunset, what the reporting requirements are, making sure that we have all of those documents available should we have an audit come in, field audit. So we kind of prepare for the worst and we hope for the best. But the reality is missing that administrative component means you're going to be paying those dollars back. So while you saved staff on the front end, you're going to end up having to pay it on the back end if they're not properly handled and administrated. And that is something that we struggle with on a regular basis. It's something that I've had lengthy discussions with administration on, that I don't have the real warm and fuzzies that we're adequately staffed to handle all of those. Every day it seems like we're stumbling across a grant that we were unaware existed. And it may have gone to the Board of Supervisors or it may not have. And we're finding that many grants that departments are doing are not coming to the board and they were not evaluated by administration. But we find them on the back end and we try to evaluate if we are in compliance or if there's going to be a problem. But definitely it's something that we need to consider.
So Rebecca, this just, it's an aha moment here, is that if we had a position in your department that was dedicated to that specific function, that would be central receiving, that would be the bounce point, and it would reduce our risk factors, it would reduce our compliance problems. It just seems like a win all the way around
Yeah.
to be able to have one single person as an area, that's their responsibility.
Yes, and I think what's, the comment that Kristen just made is that her department, they evaluate not that it's just a grant, but if it's going to meet, this goes back to that kind of strategic vision and priorities of the board. And that's really what we need. But does it meet that? And if it doesn't meet that, or the administration exceeds the benefit, if the costs are going to end up being more to administer that grant, then we shouldn't have it. You really do have to start evaluating. It's more than just, well, we got a $50,000 grant or we got a $100,000 grant, we're going to save this person. It may not be a program that this county wants to have. There might be terms where the outlay on that grant far outweigh the benefits of ever going down that road. So I think some of that centralization of grant administration and folding, also administration in that discussion, it kind of helps us evaluate if that grant should ever be signed off on. And we do find grants that we're stuck with right now that I kind of question if we ever should have gotten involved in those respective grants.
So my point is that that person, once they're in that position, should be able to check a box saying, I approve, I've reviewed, I am willing, I can handle this, or we can handle this, or not.
And it also comes down to a grant policy. And so that's also something
don't
that
have
we've
one.
discussed and we don't have, and we have been written up by the grand jury auditor that we probably do need to have. It's an internal control issue. So there's not a lot of oversight on the grants that we have. If it's a very large grant, then that department's going to come to the board. If it's a small grant, I think that the idea is, well, it's a small grant, so I don't really need to bring it to the board. And it's revenue, so what difference does it make? Well, it does kind of make a difference because of that administrative component. And when you add up all of those small grants, they add up to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it does create a risk to the county. So I think that there is a grant policy missing here. And I did find one that, I think would work relatively well for our county. It is something that we have historically talked about bringing forward to the board. I think this board has actually talked about, I don't know if it was this board or the prior board, talked about wanting to have a grant policy in place. It may have been you. So it is something that we do need to address. And I think as part of that policy, that's where you would fold into that administrative component.
And the other part to it too is that when you start to accept these grants, then your office is best positioned to decide whether or not we have the reserve funds necessary to front some of those costs. And if you can't be in that conversation, then all of a sudden you're scrabbling, trying to figure out, where do I get this money from to respond to this? So there's just a lot of reasons why it needs to be there and the value that it's going to bring to the overall process.
That's another big component is on these reimbursement grants. For sure, Health and Human Services Agency has built up a fund balance where they can manage that. The general fund has not. So when you look at the general fund, and in some cases Public Works, when you look at the size of some of these grants, there is not adequate reserves in the Public Works Department to afford if these are reimbursement grants. So definitely when I start looking at some of these grants, whether when they're very large or they span multiple years, and trying to figure out, we're running into this issue right now on trying to figure out cash flow with regards to the disasters. What does that look like? And trying to find all of those pieces of information is not going as swimmingly well as I had hoped that it would. So we're kind of in the dark a little bit in terms of what we're going to face with regards to cash flow, because these are reimbursement grants. If they were advanced grants, well, then I wouldn't have that stress. But these are not advanced grants, they're reimbursement grants. So that's just another piece of the puzzle on that.
And we need to be able to answer that question is, do we have adequate reserves to meet the needs of that particular grant? And some grants we may walk away from simply because we don't have a funding mechanism to be able to handle them. It isn't so much that we can't do the work, but we just can't fund it at this point.
Right,
So
correct.
let's have those honest conversations and understand the pickle it's putting us in numerous ways, because we haven't approached it from a policy standpoint.
Correct.
So I appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm fine. She answered my question
Okay.
about the viability of the grant and whether there's enough cost built in to cover administrative duties for the whole grant, or is it costing us money because there's not enough in it to do all the administrative activities that are needed?
Right.
That's big, that's huge on whether you go forward. And then I truly believe that it needs to come to this board on any grant or through administrative office. I think we need a policy on this because we need to sign off through both the auditor and the CAO, so we know what's going on in the county as far as grants and money coming in and going out. So, I mean, that's his duty and that's her duty, so.
We had, I mentioned the other day, a lot of experience with this at the University of California. We actually had corporate foundation relations, and there was an office of grants and contracts. And that was what Ms. Cullen was talking about. And they were split. Now, as a director, we would have weekly conversations. We describe ourselves as, the people out generating the revenue were the farmers. Grants and contracts were the people who were milling and making the products that came out. And so we tried to work together, but it was clearly a sequential process. And often, again, you don't find people, it's hard to find people who could do the same thing. Person who's watching the books and being an auditor on everything, making sure everybody's doing their stuff, is not always the best person to go out and sell. So, again, a bigger organization.
Well, and I was going to add on there, I do think a better practice is going back to that is bringing the grant application to the board for review and approval. I know it could potentially slow down, and we'd have to write in exemptions if some of our emergency grant funds come with literally, 3 weeks notice of, hey, there's a funding opportunity, you need to apply. But in general, those types of grants should be coming to the board with the application materials. That allows my office, the auditor's office, to review, and then the board to weigh in on what that looks like. And I think it is a critical weakness that we've had that is, I don't say an easy fix, but a policy fix that doesn't cost us a lot of money to implement, but really could save us a lot of money on the back end.
And in GFOA, it's called check and balance. So,
So,
go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
That's all right.
Supervisor Mills. So that's something that the board would want to consider, this policy? And we can do that just on the poll of the board? Put that on your list, Mr. Lutz? Okay, I don't see any opposition from the board. Supervisor Clapp? Thank you. Continue, Supervisor Mills, if you will, sir.
Thank you. Kristen, I also noticed there was a substantial number of computers being requested. What percentage of your total IT is being requested to be replaced this year? Do you know?
About a third, about 20%? Approximately 20%.
And what I need to look at from a larger perspective is life cycle of servers, life cycle of laptops, or even software has life cycle. And if we know what those life cycles are, that we can start building something into budgets every year as a replacement schedule, so that we don't have to literally slap your budget at a specific time with a whole big, and you may say, you know what, I can forego one more year because that'll give me one more year of an additional piece of funding that I can set aside, even though, because then it's yours to use. It's just a matter of making the best use of it and not pulling a whole bunch of IT components together in one lump sum, and then somewhere at 5 or 8 or 10 years down the road, here it is back again. So I'm just trying to be sure that we have IT is checked off on it, and everybody really understands the cost and the benefit to how these replacement processes, specifically with IT, work. I am so pleased that we're getting a security analyst in this county. That is something that my oldest son, is currently doing for the government. And so having those conversations with IT before we actually make replacements, I think is just a critical element as to whether or not it'll be a long-term success.
Well, and Kristen, you might not know this answer or not, but I'm kind of curious. On the life cycle for your computers that you're replacing, because with some of the programs that Health and Human Services uses, often it's requiring replacement more frequently than some of our other departments require. My question is, how long on average do you know are you holding on to those computers? Because when we surplus those, there's a good opportunity for those to go to programs that don't have as intensive of a need for computers. So essentially they get the surplus machines that are still viable, but because of the requirements with some of your programs that you interface with, you have to update it. And in fact, the state builds in a cost to say, update these machines through this cycle.
So to answer your specific question, I don't know it off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that we actually have an IT staff member in our building who monitors all of this regularly. So to speak to your point about communication with IT, very much so. We have a wonderful team member of theirs who 100% of the time assists Health and Human Services and kind of stays on top of the schedules, and she's consistently making further improvements to making sure that we're doing that life cycle consistent refresh. She's getting better and better at that, some of those processes, and helping us tremendously in that capacity. In addition, with Health and Human Services, we have additional layers than perhaps other entities. A lot of times when you're purchasing computers with state and federal funding, you have to do these advanced planning documents and turn them in to the state and get approval. And so there's kind of this additional bureaucratic steps that we take in order to make sure we're able to utilize our funding sources at the federal and state level to pay for our IT enhancements. And oftentimes our IT enhancements will come because of a change at the state level. Our child welfare system is in the process of being upgraded, and that's going to bring on some additional information technology needs. And again, that's one of the reasons why we have made that choice to fund a IT staff member in-house, because we do have, we come with a lot of programs and servers and requirements and things like that. But Marcos, do you know anything about the transition schedule, or anything to add? Or
No.
Marco.
Well,
Sorry.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Yes, of course.
So as I understand it, you have an IT technician in Health and Human Services assigned to our IT county?
Exactly.
Okay, good.
Yes,
They're
and
embedded there then.
yes, so
Right.
that
Just wanna make
communication
sure
is
that
very
was
much
correct.
there. Marcos Munoz is our business administrator. He knows a little bit more about this piece.
Thank you, Kristen. Sorry, Dennis.
Yeah, that's correct.
Hi, Marcos Munoz, Business Administrator for Health and Human Service Agency. Yes, we have worked closely with our IT person in our agency, and the life cycle is roughly 5 years for the computer. So we are looking to replace roughly between 20 and 25% of our computers right now in our agency, and that is on pace, maybe a little heavier than that 5-year average. So we do work closely with her. She gives us the recommendation schedule on how many. We don't only have computers just for employees, but we also have them. We have a network room. We also have interview rooms which have computers, so it's not just employee computers, but computers for all areas of our agency.
And I think the CEO's point is a great idea, and that being sure that we internally surplus those used machines out to parts that don't need the heavy.
Yes, absolutely.
I fully agree. Thank you. Thank you.
Our librarian has a smile.
She'll take a 6-year-old computer, right? Yeah.
She's writing script on us, guys.
See, this is what's really cool when we have these kind of discussions, because
Yeah.
then there's an interplay that happens between department heads that is it's not often done. And so when we can have these discussions, everybody kind of says, I can play a role here, I can do something else there, and it works. So I really appreciate the conversation. That's all I had for you, Kristen. I appreciate your answers. I wanted to go back to environmental health if I could for just a moment, because I see Mr. Banner has come to see us. You noted in your report out, Mr. Banner, that department fees haven't been updated since 2009. That's going back quite a ways. So do you think that that's detrimental, or do you think maybe some of these fees are too high or too low, or we don't know?
I think it's our highest priority right now to evaluate the fees and adjust them as needed. So I'm in the process of doing that right now. It's critical, I think.
So do you feel that that's something you're going to be able to do in the next 90 days, 6 months?
Yes, next 90 days for sure.
90
maybe
days?
less. Yeah.
Wow, okay. And what kind of impact do you think that will have on your budget when you get done? Just a rough idea.
We hope it will increase the revenues by 25% approximately.
Okay.
I realize there's a lot of stakeholder work that's needed as part of this too, and we will go through that process. That's probably will take longer than actually estimating the actual costs. We'll be working with our stakeholders,
I had spoken before you came in this morning regarding the grading and the substantial amount of grading that's been done in our county, and yet there's very little in terms of money received on permits. And I know that when we find them, all we're doing is asking them to do an as-built and to get a permit. It's almost counterproductive to, well, I'll just wait till I get caught with this. I would like to see if the board would come back at a future point, and that's what I was discussing, to maybe revise how we respond to grading without a permit. And we're not talking just about the individual, might be including the licensed contractor or unlicensed contractor who is involved in this whole process, so that we can regain some control on the environmental damage that's being created in the county.
Right. Yeah, I'd be happy to work with code enforcement and public works on that issue.
Okay, that was all I really had, was that. So thank you for coming.
If I would add the one thing on that for those fees too, and it's that fine line on timing. I mean, 90 days is aggressive in terms of environmental health fees, and I just want to make sure that we provide Brad with enough support that we're going to need to do stakeholder input. They're going to need to finish that nexus study to really identify what their costs are. But the stakeholder input with the community is going to be critical for something like this. Having done quite a few fee studies and updates, and particularly in the environmental health realm, there's a lot of stakeholders that need to be able to provide the input for a palatable recommendation to come back to the board, particularly with the amount of time that it's been since the fees have been adjusted. So I add that piece of, I think it would be helpful for you to come back to the board with updates probably on this is where we're at, and I'm sure board members will want to be involved in stakeholder input meetings in their individual districts. So My comment to Brad would be, keep the board updated, but if it takes longer than 90 days, it might be part of the process, and it's better to make sure we do our due diligence than to rush it.
Agreed. We don't want to see a whole room full of angry people. So,
Yeah, we've handled it before.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. So in summary, there were some questions that I was going to ask of Rebecca, and it has to do, and it's not in the budget that I can see it, but it has to do with facilities. Currently, we have the jail and the sheriff's offices, and those are under a loan. It's actually a bond, I believe,
The general obligation,
general obligation bond. How much is remaining on that? What are we paying per year for it?
so the debt service changes every year just depending on what the principal and interest is for that respective year. For the 17-18 fiscal year, it's $830,000 for principal and about $1.3 million for interest on the loan. The balance will be 29.7 million on that bond.
Okay. And this is, that's just for the sheriff's department and the jail, correct?
That's
Or
for,
does that include the courthouse?
well, no, we didn't pay for the courthouse. The
Right, that's
courthouse is
separate.
a state-owned property. The jail and sheriff's administration building was paid for, so AB 900 was a grant that the county received through the state. AB 900 paid for the jail, for a portion of the jail, the lion's share of the jail. The general obligation bond paid for the sheriff's administration building and any additional costs for the jail that were not covered by AB 900. But the lion's share of the sheriff's administration building, well, 100% of the sheriff's administration building was paid for by the general obligation bond. And then a portion of the jail was paid for by the general obligation bond, but the lion's share was paid for using AB 900.
So those costs aren't included in the sheriff's budget?
No, because it's a county general obligation bond. So the county is on the hook for that. So what happens is my office figures out what the debt service is going to be on any given year. We calculate what that bond rate is going to be, give that information to the tax collector. That's what she puts on the bill. So it just depends on what the assessed values are for, basically once the assessor gives us the certified roll, we figure out based on that assessed value, the amount that we need to generate off of that assessed value based on that following year's debt service payments, principal and interest, and then figure out what that rate's gonna be. So that is basically on the backs of the property tax owners, is the payment of that bond.
Plus you're maintaining a debt service ratio during that period as well?
We do.
Okay. And then moving on to the Health and Human Services building, that's a rented building?
Health and Human Services was a long-term
Is it a 20-year lease?
On St. Charles, yes.
Yeah, 20-year lease? And it's $43,000 a month?
I think that's what she said. I think in their budget, it's about $537,000 for the year.
For the year?
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you. And roughly, does anybody know how many square feet that is?
A lot.
That's it off the wall. The reason I was asking is, when you look at square footage, cost per square foot, oftentimes in rentals, and you can understand that, you're 80 cents. What is it at the library right now? We're negotiating one in Angels Camp at about 60 cents a square foot, but it's not really commercial ADA. So there's I just wanted to know what that variable was.
I am not positive on that. Kristen will have to get
Okay.
it, yeah. That building, and it was built before I got here, but the history that I have seen on that building is that it was basically built for
For
us.
that purpose.
That's why we have that long-term lease.
Would it be more beneficial for us to be looking at a potential purchase of that building at some point?
we would have to look at that.
Just a thought. You know, when you're leasing out at that kind of rate, we should be actually doing a study to find out whether or not we should actually own it outright.
That is something that we've been talking to Health and Human Services about, and it factored into our space plan. We know
Okay.
that combined with other rental locations, the efficiencies of having one location, and again, looking at on campus here, what the opportunities are. Those are definitely factored into the space plan.
Okay.
I have a question. And built into the lease, maintenance costs, or do we perform all maintenance on the building? Because that would go into the equation.
Yeah, there is, part of the agreement is that if work needs, if they wanted to do something addition, then they get permission. And then I think you guys are paying for
But that
those
would be,
additions.
that would be an alteration on the building.
That would
If
be
you
an
want to do any
alteration.
alterations, you got to get, but the general maintenance of the HVA system, the roof, skylights, elevators, all of that, is that built into the lease? By the owner takes care of that when there is a problem, or are we paying the cost of all that maintenance?
So, yes and no, and yes and no. Depending, there's many elements of the lease where there are certain things that the building owner takes care of and other things that we will take care of. For instance, right now, we're looking at getting our air ducts cleaned. And so we have to have a conversation because the lease is slightly vague in terms of whose responsibility that is, and we're going to have that conversation. We're very fortunate, though. Our landlord at that building is very responsive and accommodating. As the auditor pointed out, that is a building that was constructed for us. So that's kind of
Whoa, stay there.
the owner is, what's the name of the? Ken James. Oh, that's right. It's Ken James.
You brought up an interesting point, duct cleaning. How often are you doing that?
Not often enough. We are.
No, I have a reason for the question, so.
Yeah, I don't recall the last time that this is the first time since we've been in the building that we've done the duct cleaning. And again, this is one of those things that when we're working with our team members and our whole agency to figure out what we can do to make the environment and make their workspace better. This is one of the things that came out of their strategic planning was the duct cleaning.
You'll find that, again, this is because of my background, that once you complete a duct cleaning, you might want to also look at, technology has improved so much in that field of clean air, and the cost is minimal by comparison. You will not need to do another duct cleaning if you can simply, if you're working with American Standard or whoever is the company that installed that equipment or has that equipment, might want to look at air cleaning systems on not ionization necessarily, but there are, it's just an option, and it will be a cost savings because you won't be dusting anymore. It's that good.
Sounds awesome. Yeah.
So, and it'll remove all allergens and all pollens, and so people have, and that was one of my problems. I was in a very clean environment when I was working, except when I was out in the field, and I retired and I got allergies because you get so used to being in clean environments.
Yeah.
So that's just something to think about for your building, considering its size. The cost would be minimal by comparison to the actual benefits that you'd see from it.
Yeah,
So
totally.
just to have a discussion on that.
Yes.
Did I start something, Leslie?
You asked the square footage, 31,271 square feet.
Thank you.
Before we left the general obligation bond discussion, I did want to bring up a point in a question while we have the auditor. We currently know there's a basically remaining balance left over from those funds of roughly $219,000. This is for the general obligation bond that was the sheriff building.
Yeah, these were the bond proceeds that we received that we drew down on in order to expend against.
We're in an interesting state in that the county signed off on the building, but it was not brought back to the board, actually, as we researched to basically certify the project as done, which leaves the question of those remaining $219,000. There are some repairs that we know are upgrades that need to be done at Sheriff that those funds could legitimately be used for. But again, I think it's a policy decision. We either would basically say that the project is done, that $219,000 then goes into the debt service for the GOB, or we use those funds to do whatever those final repairs are. One of them, I know they're looking at security cameras that needed to be done. And then Patrick, the maintenance manager, has identified some areas of upgrade or maintenance that actually does need to be done at that facility, and he was working on what those costs would be. For me, it's been a question that we've gone back and forth on. I'm looking for a resolution just to clean it up. But I think it also is warranted having this discussion.
Yeah, and I think the thing, to remember is that general obligation bond was approved by the voters of Calaveras County to pay for the initial construction. And we've been done with initial construction for quite some time. And the debt is, it's a 30-year debt. So to me, I am hesitant about using $219,000 when it could go back to basically and assist the taxpayers in reducing the amount that they need to pay, because I see that these additional items have nothing to do with the initial construction. They have to do with maintenance. And so I'm struggling with that.
No, absolutely not. I would not agree that this building is complete. We have some ongoing negotiations to which we need to get back into on remaining inadequacies on this building that have nothing to do with maintenance.
But does that have to do with?
The roof is leaking and has been leaking from day one.
But is that a contractor issue, or is that bond proceed issue?
That we need to get into the discussions on, and we need to bring, I'm talking to CAO, and Jeff's in the room now, we need to get them back to the table here relatively soon so we can put this to bed. That jail, in my opinion, should never have been signed off on, and it's still an open case to me because of the ongoing problems that we have that relate back to the construction of it. So.
And I would agree that if that's the level of discussion that needs to happen, then I think it still doesn't mean that bond proceeds should be used as a resolution for that. And it more so maybe needs to be a discussion with the contractor.
And I hear what you're saying,
yeah.
Rebecca, but I just don't want to let go. I mean, we can deal with this in a relatively short time frame and get back to you on that. But I think before we do anything, what you're suggesting that we do, and I'll agree with you that we should do that, if that's the case, we need to get this jail where it needs to be, and us saying, yes, it is complete.
Okay?
So lastly, because you're standing there, it has to do with the Fed just bumped interest rates recently, 25 basis points. And the impact that will have on us if we borrow money, but it also has a positive impact. So that's why when I was talking about the investment portfolio, about laddering in anticipation of would have been a good strategy. So I just want to make a point so everybody's aware that interest rates do impact us in good and bad ways. So we just need to be aware of that as we make our decisions.
Yep.
I do have one other question. If I recall, the interest rate we're paying is prime plus 2, is that?
On the general obligation bond?
Yes.
Well, we just refunded it. And so we just refunded all of our debt. So we did the certificates of participation and we did the general obligation bond. We just closed before the end of the year in 2016. Unfortunately, when we had initially calculated everything, we were going to be saving a ton of money because the bond market was still going to be working for us. When we went to go close, because of the presidential election and everything that happened, the bottom fell out of the bond market. So we're still saving a ton of money, not only for the county, but for the taxpayers. It's just not as much as we would have saved had we closed maybe, a month or two earlier. But we're still saving money.
Thank you.
Any further questions of Rebecca Kelly? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 15-minute break right now, our scheduled break for the morning. We'll be back at 10:45. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll resume, and Supervisor Mills?
Well, I finished pretty much with everything I had. I want to thank everybody for their responses. I think it generated a lot of good discussion and maybe some eye-opening thoughts. So I appreciate all of the department heads for willing to take the time to come in and to participate. And to some degree, the questions might have been almost blindsiding because you weren't aware we were going to ask them. But in the budgetary process, when I was on finance committees before, I felt that the directors or the supervisors are on those committees should be able to answer the questions by the time they're done and not have staff being able to answer the questions. So thank you. I now have those questions answered.
Thank you. Is there any other board member or staff member that would like to address at this time? Supervisor Tofinelli? Are you good? Are you good? You good? Supervisor Garamendi?
I had my comments.
Okay. Supervisor Mills? Supervisor Platt? And I have no further comments at this time. Having said that, Madam Clerk, do you have any comments, issues that we need to address as a board? I have no issues. Supervisor, I'm sorry. CAO Lutz. Promoted you.
Man. At this point, then, really what my office will be looking for is direction from the board as, based on the recommended budget that I submitted, what changes the board would like to see made for us to be able to bring back on the 27th a final recommended budget for the board to consider. I know there were a couple of easy ones that I'd been noting through on line changes, like the reducing the White Pines to the actual cost of the contract. We at this point are moving forward with zeroing out the Visitors Bureau line. I've already confirmed with the executive director for Visitors Bureau that she will be here on the 27th to provide the board a presentation on services that the Visitors Bureau is providing. But again, beyond that, any direction from the board on coming to a balanced zeroed budget. I know we have a meeting on Monday with Supervisor Tofinelli, Supervisor Mills, and sheriff staff to try and identify opportunities to reduce the sheriff general fund draw this year, and in turn then not freezing those positions associated with that. But beyond that, I do need direction from the board on the remaining frozen positions across the general fund, and whether the board would want to see something different come on the 27th. And I would just reiterate again, this is this placeholder. When we come to final budget in September, there's going to need to be a lot of meetings with the departments and looking at our budget overall for a long-term strategy.
Okay. Thank you, CAO Lutz. Supervisor Tofinelli?
Yes, well, my recommendation would be to continue down the line and freezing the positions that are open. However, to that caveat, we need to know on the 27th exactly what gap you're filling, and if that, because of the situations that were brought up by the DA and the probation office, what the extent of the gap is that hasn't been addressed in this budget that was presented to us, and how you're going to fill the remaining gap. So we have an idea whether you're going to try and use teeter funds or some other source to fill that gap, because I anticipate there being a larger gap than what you presented here. So that would be my direction.
Supervisor Garamendi?
Yeah, I'm glad we have a final budget in September because obviously state budget will be resolved. But I'm also, concerned because we started living with the budget in July. So, while we wait to finalize it, we're already acting as if it's finalized at the end of this month. We do have opportunity to change, but we have 2 months or almost 3 months in there that we're living this budget. I've got some concerns about the freeze. I like it and it appeals to on a very emotional level because it says we might get back to where we were. But I've been struggling, trying to figure out this budget from the parking lot positions that have existed for a decade in some cases. And I worry that, that's having this fantasy out there that we're going to get back to where we were in 2007. And those days aren't coming. And I also want to note that, nobody's forcing us to do this stuff. We are making a conscious decision as a board, policy-wise, that this is what we're going to do. We have other alternatives. We've discussed it, but this is our choice. And as a majority of this board, this is where we are. And I think that if we didn't do a freeze, but we actually just lived where we are budget-wise, it's across the board. Those are cuts, and those are brutal, and they hurt, and they're going to make our community less safe. They're going to make our, we're going to be less safe. We're going to have less public safety. There's just no way to put lipstick on this pig. This is tough. Gary, did you want to jump in?
Well, I just want to say, yesterday it was rejected at 12% across the board. We still have an unknown gap there, which could raise that level.
Right.
Which would be devastating to many departments.
We could be looking at a $10 million hole, which is a 20% cut. And these are choices that we're making. No one is doing this to us. And I don't like the idea of building a bigger parking lot. If we're going to do this, then there are consequences. And we need to right size and say this is now the size of our government. This is now the level of services we can provide and own it. I just don't see, I don't think as I said, I don't think we can put lipstick on this pig. We've got these outstanding huge issues. As Supervisor Tofinelli pointed out, our hole may be bigger than we thought it was. These pensions that are coming down the line, IHHS bills that are coming at us, cash flows as the auditor put out. These are huge liabilities and risks on our future. And I think if we're gonna drive off a cliff, let's buckle up our safety belts and deal with the reality of what's at the bottom. So I'm hesitant on the freeze. While the freeze makes me feel good, I don't know if that's our responsible way to go.
Thank you. Further comments? Supervisor Mills?
I'm listening to my fellow supervisors and their recommendations here. I reiterate that without a position control list in this budget, it was very difficult for us to ferret out what those true costs are because your salary and benefit packages are a substantial portion of every department's budget. But it isn't all of it. So I still think that if we were to take the time to look at the position control list and where we need to make some structural changes to it, I think we're going to find some things when we start really digging into that. And I would expect the CEO to do so and more than willing to assist. The other piece is that being around agency budgets for years, it's just something you do. You try to build in contingencies. I would prefer that departments give us the opportunity to actually put a line item in for contingencies rather than build it in some other form that we have to ferret it out. And that we don't be looking, I would like to see a look at the last 90-day period before the end of the budget cycle and say, let's go back a month before that and let's see what those line items looked like. So departments that were in essence had excess funds in them and were spending them out in that final 90 days, there's some contingency money there that might be able to be utilized as well. So there's many ways that we could approach this. I would accept what our CAO is recommending as an initial step. This is a preliminary budget, and then we're going to have to do some serious sit-down footwork between now and the adoption of a final budget to actually decide where are we going to be at and how we're going to get this done. So it is very normal for us to have a 90-day window between preliminary and final agencies. That's just the way they work. So we're going to have to dig into this to some degree, line by line, and those departments that we find. I would also like to, it was Al Segala brought up that point, look at, as a percentage of our population, we compare Amador and Tuolumne County. Well, let's say, for instance, in one department, are we understaffed or overstaffed? And in terms of providing that particular service. So I agree, Supervisor Garamendi, that that's one of those things that we need to say is are we willing to provide that level of service, or is there another level that we're going to want to work to? But that's a matter of establishing goals. And that's why I wanted so badly for us to have a sit down as a board and just review what are our underlying goals that we want to use as our policy statements to drive our budget, which drives our performance. And when we talk about having money out there, oftentimes we put money into a budget and we expect it to be spent out during the course of the year, but oftentimes it's not always spent out in a, not a rational way, but in a stable way of every 12 months. Where there's excess cash sitting in specific departments, we may want to look at just-in-time budgeting so that we can maybe utilize that cash that's being set aside in that particular 12-month period to some other use, but it still have it available in the cycle when that particular department is in need of it. There's just many ways to tangle with this, Lion, and I think that we can do it. It's just a matter of sitting down and asking our CAO and using his expertise and his background to help build something that's functional.
Thank you. Supervisor Flapp, any comment or anything? Okay. My comments on this particular issue and our budget is mirrored by my fellow supervisors here at this diocese. But I think it's important that everybody, even our public, our citizens, our department heads, our county employees, realize that we are faced with a very dire situation. And I hope we have the ability to see through this and start us on a path, not just for next year, but a sustainable path to come back to where we were at one time. But unfortunately, it's going to take some very serious consideration and some very serious reductions in some areas. Hopefully on the 27th, we'll have more insight to where those areas are. With that, is there any further from staff, Madam Clerk? Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Garamendi.
I mean, we are making this choice. We have alternative routes that we can take to generate revenue. We are going to have less deputies dealing with the crime that exists in this community as a result of this. We are going to have less people fixing the roads. We are going to have less everywhere. And people are still going to expect the same amount of service. And our problems just keep getting harder in this county. And so we're literally, we're not taking our foot off the gas now that we're in the mud. We're getting out of the car. And we're going to be standing in the middle of it. I mean, I think that, if we're going to do this, I understand democracy. We'll go with what the majority of this board does, and I will do my duty just like everybody else will. But we need to, we own this. We own what's happening right now. The five of us.
There's something to think about. Could we possibly suggest that before that final budget, until that final budget's adopted, that none of the departments take this as a carte blanche to just go out and procure capital assets or add positions or whatever until we really have that final number. I mean, we're just asking for a 90-day, just hang on till we can get this put together, rather than, oh, there's the budget, and it says, I've got this, so I'm going to go do it now.
That's a quarter of their work year. We're talking about asking people
Well,
not to plan out their year. We can't just pass. I don't think so.
We're just going to be simply saying, continue as you are over the next period until we've adopted the final budget, and then we can start making those moves.
I wouldn't support that, Dennis, because this is where we are. We don't have 90 days of extra money. This is what we're going to do. This is where we're at. I'll go with everybody else.
Supervisor Toffenelli?
Yeah, I would say, let's go forward, and we have the 27th. We've gave direction to the CAO. Let's see what the CAO brings back on the 27th. In the meantime, we can all think about any other directions to go at that point, or even until we get to the final budget. This is the preliminary budget. I understand what Supervisor Garamendi is saying. The department heads are giving direction at this point, starting July 1st. But again, we still don't even know what the state is going to do. There's a lot of things up in the air with the state and their budget that hasn't been finalized yet. So I say, as we go forward from here, there are some meetings tomorrow that was brought up by the CAO between Supervisor Mills, myself, the CAO, and the Sheriff's Department. And what other ideas the CAO has between now and the 27th that he could present to us to at least fill some of the gap. I still say that we are where we are. Supervisor Garamendi is correct. But I just can't see across-the-board cuts in some departments. We would be literally putting them out of business just about. So let's hold on until the 27th and see what the CAO brings to us.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to personally thank all the members of this county, the employees, the department heads, our staff, for all the hard work they've put in thus far on this budget issue. We do have a long way to go, but I want to make sure that everybody understands the appreciation that we have for the folks that make this county run. And that's the folks that take care of our county and its citizens. With that, Madam Clerk, do we have any other issues we need to address?
We do. Supervisor announcements. In compliance with AB 1234, Chapter does Government Code Section 53232.3D, this is the time for board members to report on meetings attended on behalf of the county and to carry out their duties as a county supervisor.
Okay. I will start with Supervisor Toffenelli.
I have nothing to report at this time.
Supervisor Garamendi.
I've been here with you guys. I can report.
Supervisor Platt.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to give you a eraser, a throw at me. Anyway, I was at my CA1 meeting, and they're wanting to come before the board and be dissolved and go and become a district instead of an area. So that might be coming to the board soon.
Okay. Supervisor Mills.
Okay, I got to go back to May 23rd, Tuesday. Met with Congressman McClintock's office to relay our county's numerous declared states of emergency and that we are primarily disadvantaged communities in need. We need his voice. May 24th, Wednesday, attended the CCWD meeting to hear their final budget presentation and was present for the retirement party. I believe Supervisor Garamendi was here as well for the two employees from facilities. Attended the scholarship presentations to the graduating seniors at Bret Harte and spoke with many constituents to thank them for supporting our students. May 26th, Friday, testified at the Public Utilities Commission hearing on behalf of the Copper Telephone on their rate change request and attended the 50th anniversary celebration of the Arnold Library. June 1st, Thursday, helped host the Highway 4 Corridor meeting where we toured the Angels Camp Power Plant, heard of the challenges to operating this older project along with the history. It's kind of interesting. When I was in college, I had an opportunity to be a purchasing agent for a company that built those power panels and actually purchased many of the relays that I was looking at now 50-some years later. It's really weird. Here at a presentation by the Tuolumne County Resource Conservation District on their project to assist those along the Highway 4 corridor with water catchment money and water savings money. Anybody interested can go to the Tuolumne RCD website. The information is there. June 4th, Sunday, attended the retirement party for Terry Bullock, 34 years of service not only to the City of Angels Camp but Murphy's Fire and to our county hazmat team as an instructor and an active participant in many, many hazmat incidents throughout our three-county area over the years. June 6th, Tuesday, staff attended the Angels Camp Business Association Coffee Talk Tuesday, where history of the building of Middleton Shopping Center was discussed, and the Miwok Indians and their concepts for the future, and also with domestic violence was discussed there as well. Attended Angel City Council in support of ACPA as they presented their many projects that they've been doing throughout the year, and to be sure that they are supporting businesses within the City of Angels Camp. June 7th, Wednesday, attended the Council of Governments, reviewed the city and county capital improvement projects, approved the budget, and approved the need for changes to correct our audit deficiencies. June 8th, Thursday, attended Murphy Sanitary District meeting, reviewed the plans for improving the ability to handle another wet winter and a response to the DWR orders on their spill. Staff attended CCWD to hear their proposed response to the draft EIR for the ban ordinance and presentation by HDR on the cost of service study that's currently being undertaken by CCWD for those that are in their service area. Attended the Foothills Fire Safe Council meeting. The CERT program project is now complete. Reviewed the Chipper project and reviewed the tree mortality projects that they're in process with right now. And they did receive a $75,000 grant from PG&E to assist them with some of that work. June 10th, Saturday, attended the Copper Homecoming Breakfast. We spoke to many constituents there to hear their concerns and feedback. And June 12th, Monday, met with LAFCO representative to prepare for testifying next week in Sacramento on the value of special districts bringing to the communities here in Calaveras County. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Supervisor Mills. On the 24th, I attended our agenda meeting, which I do prior to any board meeting. We discussed our quite extensive issues, and hopefully, I want to personally thank our staff, especially our board clerk, and Rebecca Turner for formalizing our systems that move slowly at times in the past, but they have been greatly increased, and it's an actual pleasure to attend those meetings, to make sure that our meetings run smooth and informative. I did attend the Governor's Task Force meeting on tree mortality, also in Sacramento, and also the coordinating meeting on that. We did discuss the funding on the state level regarding funds in the previous budget submission draft by the governor, where it indicated $50 million towards the tree mortality program for the state of California. Most importantly, the high hazard counties, which Calaveras is one of. Unfortunately, the revised budget came out where they reduced that amount to $2 million for tree mortality, but the explanation was provided by CAL FIRE that they're going to take the remaining $48 million and fund and man their fire apparatus for wildfire year-round instead of just during the fire season. Now, it sounds pretty bad where they took $48 million, but I was assured by CAL FIRE and the Governor's Task Force Committee that those funds will be allocated as needed, and if we have a situation where we need funding emergency to take care of our tree mortality, they will be able to allocate those funds, but they haven't given me a direct source yet, but they said it doesn't look as bad as it appears. Other than that, I've been preparing for the budget like the remainder of our staff and our supervisors. I just received an email. I understand Assemblyman Frank Bigelow was going to make a meet and greet in Murphy's on Friday. That has been canceled due to a family emergency with Frank I'm sorry, with Assemblyman Frank Bigelow. Family member is ill, so we're going to give our hopes and prayers out to that. Hopefully that's not going to be a serious issue. I want to also commend our search and rescue teams for the recent plane crash issue that occurred last week. I got a phone call when that plane was missing out of the Grayson area, and I was quite pleasantly surprised that our search and rescue teams, along with other agencies surrounding from Amador as far away as Alameda County, participated in that search. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful. It wasn't a rescue, it became a recovery issue. Hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the family of the pilot. With that, we look forward to our next meeting. And I want to thank staff one more time. You guys did a great job. Meeting's adjourned.